Hello, everybody. My name is Sil the DM, and I am bringing you a campaign recap for my Thursday campaign, The City, for the week of January the 30th, I think was Thursday. We're gonna go a little fast today. Let's try and get this done in a timely fashion. So to pick up where we left off, Levy was in the Grand Courthouse with Father Isaacs, a paladin and the head of the Scaled Order of Jamal. Levy explained why they were there, wanting to parley with the god Jamal to try and figure out why clerics and paladins were experiencing a bit of lethargy and ennui, as well as difficulty summoning up their spells. Nothing preventing them from accessing their divine blessings or boons, but a general sense of distance and void. Through this, Father Isaacs, who seemed very depressed and quiet, explained that Jamal had to go away for a while, that the god had come to him and informed him that it would be leaving for a while, and that had pushed Father Isaacs into a deep depression, knowing that he would probably die before his god ever returned, and just the feeling that something was missing. The feeling that a void had been created in his life that was unfillable. Having grown up in the shadow and presence of Jamal for over 80 years, Jamal was very much like a father to Father Isaacs. And the idea that the god had to leave for the last years of his life really hit the old man pretty hard. And they talked for a little while, and the general consensus was that perhaps several of the gods, or all of the gods, had decided that they needed to part for a little while, perhaps to end their differences and put an end to this war that had been raging, as gods have been killing gods now for a few hundred years at this point in story. It would do them more good to perhaps settle this and stop risking their own existence as well as the existence of their followers. Perhaps they were trying to achieve peace. He didn't know, he didn't have the details. But Levy could pick up enough to know that that's probably the reason that divine casters were having such a hard time. If for some reason the gods were on another plane, or somewhere else that was distant and far away, for the first time, having to commune with them not being on the same plane might just feel different enough to cause this sort of lethargy. It still has access to your powers, but they're just further away. And Levy tried her best to cheer up the old man, and that seemed to work. But Levy also bombed almost every insight check, so she's not really sure what read Father Isaacs was giving. After which she left the courthouse, and everyone else prepared to go visit the Duke, when there was sudden cries from outside. Everyone rushed out to find a crowd forming about 150 feet away, down the road towards the keep. Two of them spotting the body of a human that looked like it had been exploded outward. And two of them very keenly noticing that there were arrows in the body, with feathering of red, white, and black. Everyone quickly rushed over, as did Patricia Holston, the paladin who had gotten them in to speak with Father Isaacs. She quickly cleared the civilians out of the way with an impressive display of divine magic, and took control of the situation, ordering the city's guard to set up a perimeter, figuring out that if it was arrows that hit the man, they could only be shot from such and such a distance, and begin to enforce a perimeter. Some of the party asked if they could investigate with her, and she told them to keep their distance, but they were allowed to stay. And they looked and couldn't determine any fire, acid, or any sort of arcane residue that would indicate what sort of spell or magical effect might have caused this. It looked like the man had merely exploded. But again, several people in the party noticed arrows not unlike the ones that Midnight had in the body, which had since disappeared. not sure what to make of this and wanting to distance themselves from it before some actual sort of quarantine gets put in place or roadblock, they decide to push on towards the keep. Along the way, Levy spotted some movement, as did Siren. It almost looked like an arrow ripped through the air. Maybe two. It was rather hard to see, and Levy spotted a very odd-looking figure creeped very low, with weird eyes, just at the corner of her vision, as she stepped up in between midnight, as it looked like the figure had taken a shot at midnight. And then the figure just seemed to melt away into shadow. Midnight, who was still concerned about his arrows, continued counting as they made their way to the keep and discussed what Levy had learned from talking with Father Isaacs, and could determine that he was missing no arrows. Eventually the group met with the Duke after being escorted in by a soldier named Jefferson and having a brief conversation with the secretary, as he prefers to be called. The Duke, Harold Arl, is a titan of a man, 6'7", built like a professional wrestler, but getting older in his years. He's in his late 40s, early 50s at this point. And they cut pretty quickly to the chase that they were here to try and help the Duke if he had a job for them that would improve his relations with the city, and that they really weren't here just to be like political, oh, we were sending someone to your city, so we made sure they went in and checked with you. This was we're here to help. Is there something we can do? And the Duke let them know that not too long ago, about 3 weeks, the city had actually come under attack from some frost giants, which wasn't really an issue. The city is very well designed to kill and be defended against frost giants, as the several frost giant clans that exist north of Rust Cairn, which is the mountain next to the city, there are many giant clans there, and the frost giants are known to be particularly aggressive. So the city was designed and founded with the idea that it would need to defend itself against giants. However, the Jarl of the giants, Clan Veshni, arrived to the scene on the back of a dragon. And that sort of caught the city off guard, destroyed several buildings, and killed a lot of civilians before they managed to rout the ground forces and put enough pressure on the Jarl that he had to pull back. The damaged buildings have already been repaired, but it was very concerning to the Duke that such a powerful asset had been acquired by the Frost Giants, and he didn't really know what their next plan is. But the Duke alluded to the fact that he had been fighting all of the giant clans personally for most of his life, and knew that they were clever and cunning tacticians, but also extremely thorough. And he knew that a party of adventurers, possibly with unique magic items or gifted abilities that his ordinary troops wouldn't have, could potentially infiltrate the Frost Giant fortress in the north, acquire information of the Giants' plans for future attacks of the city, and get out with minimal casualties or conflict. And the party agreed that was probably something they could handle. They have the Ring of Silence, they have decent magical capabilities, and good trickery sort of things to trick or confuse people. They're really well kitted for this sort of deep infiltration, get in, get out, try not to pick a fight kind of encounter. So they agreed to do it and asked for a bit more information about the giants, and the Duke explained about 4 different giant clans in the area who are all warring with each other over territory, including Stockton. And they asked if there was anyone they knew who might be able to provide them a bit more of a clear path. And the Duke mentioned that his son Thomas might have known someone who could help. And while the Duke went and asked Thomas, his son, about this, his eldest son, the party conferred that they should take the job and they could probably handle it quite well. The Duke returned and let them know that Thomas had mentioned an orc by the name of Thrugga, who was working as a bouncer in this city. Thrugga used to live in the wilds of the north in the Blood Peaks with his clan, and he had come to live in the city about 6 years ago, and was fairly well known locally as just being a gruff, very strong, enigmatic sort of person, but not one that would make you think anything negative about them. They were an outstanding citizen, um, and he suggested that they should speak to him. The Duke excused himself to go speak to his daughter at that point, as the murder in the streets had her and many other people in the city shook. It's very clear that murders, at least not something anywhere near this open and uh, direct, happen in this city, and it's really sending waves. Before leaving, however, they cost the valet of the Duke, a man named Dirk, to fetch Darius Crackstone, the arcane forger in the castle, a rainbow-haired dwarf. Um, Darius spoke with them briefly. Valinor wanted to know if they could exchange spell books or scrolls, and Darius informed him that while he has access to a lot of powerful magic, spell books and the like aren't something he's ever dabbled with. His ability to arcanely and innately infuse items with magic comes from a sorcerer bloodline, which made Valinor annoyed, since Valinor just, prefers wizards. But the conversation ended pretty quickly, and Darius went back to work, and the party left to go find the dive. Valinor deciding to take off with a bit of the party funds to go buy himself a 50 gold diamond and look into how much scrolls would cost, visiting a magic shop that Darius recommended. The rest of the party, however, went to the dive, where they met Thrugga. Sorry for the image being a little stretched. Thrugga is this burly, full-blooded orc at about 5'6", but built like Wolverine. Seemed very gruff and anxious with a lot of people approaching the bar with arms and armor, as is his job, basically. But the party eventually managed to stumble out into the fact that they were here to speak with him, sent by the Duke, or at least the Duke told them where to find him. They were pretty nondescript about that. He pulled them in, curious about all this, and told his boss he was taking 5 minutes. Sat down at a table, invited the party to sit, and told them they have 5 minutes. And the party explained to him that they were going to go north to try and spy on the fire giants. Not to fight, but to try and pick up information and try to plan for future attacks. Thrugga seemed to get really intense at all this, and very quickly agreed to help them. Having been from the area, he laid down some ground rules. One, that they would have to follow his orders to the T and on time. Two, that if for some reason he wanted to do something, they would not stand in his way, though he made it very clear it was not his intention to fight the giants at any point. And the party agreed to these terms. He told them they'd leave in the morning, and got up and left because it had taken about 5 minutes for that conversation. He yelled across the way to his boss, letting him know he was leaving. Zahn went to the little gnome who ran the establishment and asked about getting some rooms, which he gave for a slightly marked up price, especially since they were taking away his bouncer and one of his best employees. And they had a bit of a conversation, and Zahn learned that Thrugga's wife and child had very recently been killed in that giant's attack, and the gnome wanted to make sure that if they were taking him north for something, they were keeping an eye on him, which I don't know if Zahn shared with the rest of the party. They went and did a little shopping, picked up some winter clothes and a few other odds and ends, heard some more rumors going around about the man who had been murdered, and the fact that the guards believed they were getting closer to catching the person, and had some narrow encounters with whoever they were chasing, which involved some breaking and entering and sort of Ferris Bueller's Day Off style like sketches of like running through other people's houses and whatnot. They also learned that the man who had died wasn't a very good person. He was kind of an ornery bastard who even the homeless stayed away from, especially the children. It just didn't have many friends and just seemed to not be a very good person. but they never really dug into it much deeper than that. They picked up some winter clothes, knowing that once they get beyond the tree line north of the city, they will hit the endless snow and ice fields at the top of the world. And at that point, even though it's summer, they're going to need winter clothing. So they picked up some winter clothing and a few supplies they were looking for, and then headed back to the inn for the night. They woke up and enjoyed a quick breakfast and set off, with Thrugga at the head. He took them out and around the fishing village that rests at a lake at the bottom of Ruscairn, keeping them pretty far away from it, though there was a sign that was called it Little La. Though I don't believe I mentioned that in game. That was my bad, guys. And they headed north, getting pretty close to the edge of the forest, which Siren knew to be his home, where his mother lived. They spent the night in the tower, and in the morning, Siren prepared good berries for everyone. Now, through all of this interaction with the Duke and the talk of the giants, the mark on Siren's chest had been growing colder and colder, and Zahn did try to figure out what it was and did touch it and get their fingers stuck to it, which Thrugga helped with some whiskey he keeps in a water skin. It wasn't hurting as much, but it was definitely getting colder, and the visions that Siren had felt when he had been unconscious after the battle with Sin sort of were hanging heavier on his mind as he was getting closer to home, the village he saw being ravaged in those visions. Upon arriving there, the party learned that Siren was from a small hobbit shire, a halfling shire, known as Rithshire. Rithshire has about a 90% halfling population, a few tabaxis, gnomes, and elves, but also a healthy Caboosian community that live in a small under-village. Caboosian being a original insectoid race for my setting, loosely based off of an old Magic the Gathering race, I think called Nantuko, or Nantuko. I just like insectoid like characters. As we met Kagwa earlier in the story, Kagwa Nguyen. So Siren led them to their home, wanting to stop in and visit his mother. He hadn't seen her right now in about 6 years. He had lived for 55 years in Rithshire before becoming about 110 years old and deciding to leave. And he's about 117 now, so it's actually been about 7 years since he's seen his mother. And she didn't really know where he ended up, so she wasn't really able to contact him. Siren and the group ran into his mother at her house. She was doing some woodwork in her work clothes, and she was very excited to see her son and ran over to hug him. And got very awkward quite quickly, as she apparently had something that she had wanted to contact him about, but hadn't had a way to get a hold of him. It was at this point that someone else exited the house, a young-ish halfling woman, probably in her early 30s, who Siren's mother introduced as her new wife, having remarried since Siren had left home, which had Siren a little staggered. So his mother, Cyriel, and her new wife, Sylvia, invited everyone into the home to have a drink and just rest their feet for a little bit and talk. And Cyriel seemed very anxious and nervous and worried about how her son would sort of react to all this, as her and her son had lived alone for 55 years together after her husband had died. And she had spent a lot of that time alone, and then more time alone after Siren had left, where she didn't even have her son around. And she was unsure how her only son would react to her remarrying and the whole sort of thing. And Siren tried to get it across that he was confused and sad, but also happy for her. And that seemed to make her feel a lot better. And gave her enough courage to bridge the fact that her and Sylvia were considering adopting or reproducing through magical means, and wanted to know his opinion on that. And his opinion was basically, well, I mean, if you want to do that thing, you should do it. And her reaction to that was, well, it would be your sibling, your either adopted or half sibling, and they would hopefully be a part of your life. And Siren made it very clear that he would want to be a part of their life. That if he had a sibling, he would very much want to be there for that sibling. Um, and that seemed to make his mother and Sylvia very happy. Um, and as they were Thrugga, after all this, and it also was apparent that Thrugga had met his mother before, probably when he was living in the wilds. It had been about an hour or two in game for all of this conversation and exposition. Um, and Thrugga was reminding them that they needed to keep moving, and that on their way back they could stop for a few days when they were less rushed for time, in theory. And Siren agreed, and his mother hugged him, and he hugged his new mother, and was just very... She seemed very happy that he was being so accepting, and the pair of them seemed to be alright with each other. And that's where we ended the session. It wasn't crazy high energy, a little bit of mystery, some intrigue, and a new quest. Hopefully Levy will remember at some point that she should send a message to Ohm to let him know the information, as he still doesn't know why things are going wrong. But to be fair, Levy's player had to leave early for class, and we had two other players not arrive. Normally I wouldn't have even continued the session at that point, but one of the players said they'd be late, and then over an hour and a half into the session just said they weren't going to be coming. So I continued the game because we were already playing, but it's also why you didn't really hear about Kovalin or Midnight doing anything. I don't like to take direct control of my players' characters, because I don't really know how they'd be played in every situation. But I want to thank everyone for coming by. If you have more questions about the world, please ask. And if you could, check me out on Patreon. I just uploaded a private link on my Patreon page, which leads to the World Anvil page for my D&D setting, Tyre or God's Home. We are currently dealing with the continent that this campaign and my new campaign, The Frontier, are set on, which is really exciting for me. I'm doing major cities, duchies, countries, that sort of thing first, and I'll get down to the nitty-gritty of individual places as we move on with that website. But for just even $1 a month on Patreon gives you access to that, original fiction set in the setting written by me, all artwork I get commissioned for NPCs and characters within my world, I upload randomly to my Patreon. You also get access to homebrew that I either am hired to do on Fiverr, or I make just for my setting on a whim. So I highly recommend checking that out. I want to thank everyone for coming by, and have yourself a great February. Salute.